The sun burned low over the horizon as Daniel Reed tightened the reins of his horse. The small wooden wagon behind him carried sacks of flour, beans, and a few tools, supplies for the little cabin he and his 6-year-old daughter called home. It had been 3 years since his wife's death, but her memory clung to him like a ghost in the wind. Every mile toward town reminded him of what he'd lost: warm laughter, soft hands, a home filled with light. Now, he only had silence, broken by his daughter's innocent humming and the creak of the wagon wheels. The town of Willow Creek was small but alive. Faded storefronts lined the dusty street, and the scent of horses mixed with the aroma of baked bread. Daniel tied his horse outside the general store, his boots crunching the dirt as he entered. A few townsfolk nodded politely, but he could feel their eyes: pity, curiosity, maybe both. Everyone knew him as the quiet widower from the ridge. He traded his goods, stocked up on feed, and tried to leave unnoticed. He had no plans to linger, no room for conversation. As he stepped out, a strange sound caught his ear, a faint, broken whisper carried by the evening breeze. He paused, scanning the alley between the saloon and the blacksmith's shop. At first, he saw nothing but shadows. Then, from behind a stack of crates, a figure moved, a young woman, her dress torn, her face pale beneath the grime. Her lips trembled as she met his gaze. "Please, have mercy," she whispered, voice thin as thread. Something in her eyes, desperation mixed with a flicker of hope, rooted him to the ground. Daniel's heart tightened. He'd seen hunger before, but never this kind. The woman's hands clutched her abdomen as if she hadn't eaten in days. A torn veil hung from her tangled hair, a bride's veil, now gray with dust. "Ma'am," he said softly, kneeling down. She flinched, shrinking back like a wounded animal. "I'm not here to hurt you." She blinked, tears forming but not falling. The sight of her loneliness stirred something deep within him, something he thought had died long ago, the urge to protect, to care. Daniel removed his coat and gently draped it over her trembling shoulders. She didn't resist, though her eyes darted nervously toward the busy street. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, voice barely audible. "Clara," she whispered. "I was supposed to be married yesterday." Daniel frowned, confusion mingling with pity. The townsfolk had said nothing about a wedding. Her gown, though dirty and torn, still carried traces of lace and fine stitching, too fine for someone alone in an alley. "Who did this to you?" he asked, but her eyes filled with fear before she turned away. He offered her a small loaf of bread from his satchel. She took it with trembling hands and ate slowly, as though every bite might vanish if she hurried. Daniel watched, trying not to stare. She wasn't just hungry, she was shattered. "You got somewhere to stay?" he asked. She shook her head, crumbs falling from her lips. "They locked the church when I ran," she murmured. "I thought he loved me, but he left me there." Her words cracked like dry wood in the cold. Daniel's chest tightened. He'd known heartbreak, but betrayal like that cut deeper than any wound. The street lamps flickered to life as night crept in. Daniel knew he couldn't leave her there. "My wagon's just up the road," he said gently. "You can rest there till morning." She hesitated, eyes filled with disbelief. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me?" He looked at her, and in that fragile moment, he saw his late wife's kindness reflected in her eyes. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing," he replied. That seemed to break something inside her. A small sob escaped her throat as she nodded and led her into the night. They walked in silence toward the wagon. The stars stretched white above the quiet prairie, their cold light tracing the curve of Clara's torn veil. When they reached the horse, Daniel lifted her carefully into the back and handed her a blanket. She curled beneath it, exhaustion overtaking fear. As he sat by the wagon's edge, Daniel felt an unfamiliar peace settle over him. Maybe, just maybe, fate had crossed their paths for a reason. He looked up at the stars and whispered a prayer, for her safety, and perhaps, for his own healing too. Dawn crept across the hills, painting the fields in gold. Daniel stirred awake to the sound of gentle breathing from the back of the wagon. Clara was still asleep, clutching the blanket close as though afraid it would be taken from her. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel the heavy ache of loneliness when he woke. Instead, he felt purpose. He climbed down, started a small fire, and brewed coffee from the tin he always carried. When she woke, the scent made her eyes flutter open, confusion softening into gratitude. "You stayed," she said quietly. "Of course," Daniel replied. They shared a quiet breakfast of bread and coffee. Clara ate slowly, savoring each bite as though tasting kindness itself. As the sun rose higher, Daniel hitched the horse, planning to take her to the sheriff to see if anyone was missing her. But when he mentioned it, Clara froze. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Please don't take me there." Her voice trembled, and fear returned to her eyes. "They'll send me back." Daniel frowned. Back where? Her silence was answer enough. Something dark was chasing her, something she wasn't ready to name. Daniel decided not to press her. "Then you'll come home with me for now," he said finally. "My daughter could use company." Clara looked startled, as if unsure whether to trust him. But the gentleness in his voice left no space for doubt. They rode through the quiet prairie toward Daniel's homestead, the wind carrying the scent of pine and dust. When the cabin came into view, small, sturdy, surrounded by a wooden fence, Clara's lips parted in silent awe. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Daniel smiled faintly. "It's home," he said, though deep inside, it had never felt whole until now. At the sound of the wagon, a little girl came running from the cabin. "Ha!" she shouted, her braids bouncing. Daniel's heart lifted. "Lydia, this is Miss Clara," he said. Lydia's curious eyes widened. "Are you a princess?" she asked. Clara laughed softly, the sound light and broken but real. "No, sweetheart, not even close." Yet as Daniel watched them, something stirred deep within him, a sense that Clara was not simply a lost bride, but a woman carrying secrets heavy enough to change both their lives forever. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. Clara helped Lydia with chores, washed dishes by the creek, and sang softly as the sun went down. Her voice carried sadness and beauty all at once, filling the small cabin with something it hadn't known in years, warmth. Daniel found himself watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. She moved carefully, as though every step reminded her that she didn't belong. Yet, Lydia adored her. Every night, Clara tucked the little girl in and whispered stories about stars that guided lost souls home. Daniel pretended not to listen, but her words soothed even him. Still, unease lingered. One evening, as Daniel stacked wood outside, he noticed Clara staring toward the ridge, her hands trembling. "Is someone after you?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her breath hitching. "I thought I saw him," she whispered. "My groom." The word fell heavy. "He isn't who he pretended to be. He wanted my dowry, not me. When I found out, he tried to." She trailed off, eyes wet. Daniel didn't ask for the rest. He didn't need to. His fists tightened with quiet rage. "You're safe here," he said, voice low and steady. "No one's gonna hurt you again." But safety was a fragile thing. That night, long after Lydia slept, Daniel heard a faint noise outside, the crunch of boots on dry soil. He reached for his rifle, heart pounding. Through the window, the moonlight glinted off something metallic near the fence. A man's shadow moved, slow and deliberate. Clara gasped when Daniel turned toward her. "He found me," she whispered, trembling. Daniel motioned her to stay inside, stepping out onto the porch. The cold night air bit into his skin. "Who's out there?" he called. Silence. Then came a cruel laugh that made his blood run cold. From the darkness emerged a tall figure wearing a tattered hat. The man's eyes gleamed with malice. "You got something of mine," he sneered. "A runaway bride with a price on her head." Daniel raised his rifle. "You best turn around," he warned. "She's under my protection." The man spat into the dirt. "Protection? You don't know what she's done." Clara stepped into the doorway, her veil barely clinging to her hair. "He's lying," she cried. But Daniel didn't flinch. He didn't need proof. He saw fear in her eyes, and that was enough. The stranger took a step closer, boots sinking into the dirt. "You don't know who she is, mister," he growled. "She stole from me, ran off with my money and my horse." Daniel didn't lower the rifle. "You're not taking her." His voice was calm but fierce, like a storm waiting to break. Clara's tears shimmered in the moonlight. "He's lying, Daniel," she whispered. "He took everything from me, my dowry, my dignity. I ran because I would have died if I stayed." Her voice cracked, and Daniel's heart twisted. The man smirked. "Pretty words. You gonna bet your life on them? Daniel's finger hovered near the trigger. For a long moment, the night stood still, the world holding its breath. Lydia's small voice broke the silence from inside the cabin. "Pa," she called softly. The sound snapped him back. He lowered the rifle just slightly, enough to think clearly. "You need to leave," Daniel said to the man. "Now." The stranger laughed. "Or what? You'll shoot me in front of your little girl." That was his mistake. Daniel fired. Not to kill, but to warn. The bullet struck the dirt near the man's boots, sending dust into the air. "Next one won't miss." The stranger snarled, eyes flashing with hatred, but he stepped back. "You'll regret this," he spat before retreating into the darkness. Daniel stood motionless until the sound of hooves faded into the night. Only then did he lower the rifle. His hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of what he'd just chosen. When he turned, Clara was weeping silently. "You shouldn't have risked yourself for me," she said. Daniel shook his head. "No one deserves to be hunted," he replied. "You did what you had to do to survive. That doesn't make you guilty." Later that night, as the fire crackled low, Clara sat by the hearth, eyes reflecting the flames. "He wasn't just my groom," she said finally, voice trembling. "He was the sheriff's son. He thought his name made him untouchable." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. That meant trouble, serious trouble. The man would return, and next time, he wouldn't be alone. Still, as he looked at Clara, frail yet defiant, he knew he couldn't turn away. "We'll face it together," he said quietly. For the first time, Clara smiled through her tears. "Together," she echoed, hope flickering like light through smoke. Morning brought the scent of fresh pine and sunlight spilling across the cabin. Clara stirred awake, feeling the weight of last night's terror slowly lift. Daniel had gone out to check the perimeter, leaving Lydia brushing her hair by the window. Clara watched the little girl's innocent focus and felt a pang of longing. This was a life she could belong to, if she could only escape the shadows of her past. When Daniel returned, he carried a basket of fresh bread and a firm resolve. "We'll make sure he doesn't come back," he said. Clara nodded, determination replacing fear. Over the next days, Daniel reinforced the cabin's fences and patrolled the outskirts. He taught Clara how to handle herself, basic self-defense and awareness, and she absorbed it like a flower soaking up sunlight. The trust between them grew, delicate but undeniable. One evening, as they sat near the fire, Clara shared fragments of her life. The wedding that never was, the cruel ambition of a man who should have loved her, and her journey across the prairie to escape him. Daniel listened, never interrupting, understanding that healing was more than protection, it was being seen and believed. Then, a letter arrived, slipped under the cabin door while Daniel fetched water. Clara picked it up with trembling hands. It bore the sheriff's insignia, and her heart clenched. She feared the worst, expecting threats or false accusations. But inside, the words surprised her. The sheriff had investigated his son's actions, and the young man had fled town, his reputation ruined. The letter also offered apologies, acknowledging Clara's courage in escaping and promising her safety under the law. Relief flooded through her body. Tears streamed down her cheeks, not from sorrow, but from the first taste of justice she'd known in months. That night, the cabin was quiet, save for the crackle of the fire and Lydia's soft breathing. Clara sat beside Daniel, their hands brushing. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel smiled, the ache of years finally easing from his heart. "You saved me too," he replied. For the first time since he'd lost his wife, he felt hope, not just for himself, but for the little family forming quietly in the frontier wilderness. Outside, the stars shimmered like distant promises, and inside, laughter, soft and real, filled the cabin, heralding a life that was no longer shadowed by fear. Weeks passed, and life settled into a rhythm neither Daniel nor Clara had imagined possible. The cabin bloomed with activity, Lydia laughing as she chased chickens across the yard, Clara tending a small vegetable garden, Daniel repairing fences and crafting furniture. Clara's once haunted eyes now sparkled with a quiet peace. She discovered small joys. Baking bread with Lydia, singing softly under the stars, and watching Daniel laugh with abandon, a sound she hadn't known existed. Together, they were forming a family, stitched together not by blood, but by shared survival and newfound love. One crisp morning, Daniel led Clara to the ridge overlooking the valley. The prairie stretched endlessly, golden under the rising sun. "I never thought I'd see this again," he said softly. Clara took his hand, warmth flooding her chest. "Me neither," she whispered. They watched as Lydia ran ahead, her laughter ringing like music. For the first time in months, Clara allowed herself to dream, not of running, not of surviving, but of living fully, of building a home filled with laughter, love, and safety. She felt whole again, anchored not in fear, but in hope. As the seasons changed, the bond between them deepened. Daniel and Clara worked side by side, preparing for winter, sharing stories, and dreaming of a future together. There were no shadows, no lurking threats, only the calm certainty of trust. One evening, beneath a sky painted with stars, Daniel took Clara's hand in his own. "I can't promise the world will always be easy," he said, "but I promise we'll face it together." Clara smiled, tears of joy sparkling. "Together," she repeated. For the first time in her life, she felt safe to love again. Years later, the cabin stood strong against the winds and storms of the prairie. Lydia ran freely in the yard, her laughter echoing across the hills. Daniel and Clara, hand in hand, watched their little family grow, the scars of the past softened by time and tenderness. Clara's veil, once torn and dusted with despair, lay folded safely in a chest, a reminder of how far they had come. Life had tested them, but together they had conquered fear, heartbreak, and betrayal. In the quiet glow of the evening, they knew one truth: happiness wasn't a fleeting dream, it was theirs, carved from love, courage, and hope.